Was it a person or an animal or?
A good-sized man, or something looks like a man.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was.
Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses.
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
Son of a bitch is about 6'9".
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
And the guy is on foot.
I don't know what... It's a big, real big person.
But it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big. But he's all in black.
Is he a black male or a white male? Did you actually see whether, or was he just wearing black?
He's all black and he's big. He is big.
Good evening, folks. And tonight we have a special show for you. DeeDee's going to do a live reading. Live narration. And we're going to try and get through this. My illustrious internet company seems to be messing with my internet again, because my feed is not what it should be, according to Google anyway. So the narration DeeDee's doing tonight is a story called The Whisling Jack. And then we will be talking about a 3-year-old boy that goes missing for 3 days and weather that's so inclement that even the searchers wouldn't go out searching. So now I'm going to hand it over to DeeDee.
Hi everyone. This story was posted by NitroJack on Reddit. It's called The Whisling Jack, and it goes like this. This is a true story. I've never told this to anyone before now, for reasons that will be obvious after you read it. This story takes place over several time periods. I'm 53 years old. I grew up in a small community on the southern end of Walden's Ridge in eastern Tennessee. Walden's Ridge is a wide, flat plateau that spans most of Tennessee from south to north on the east side of the Sasquatch Valley. Growing up, I lived in a small community there, only a little over 200 people. We just called it the Mountain. This community was surrounded on all sides by forests bordering the Prentice Cooper Game Reserve. As a kid, we'd ride our bikes all over the trails and old dirt roads on that mountain. Hiking, hunting, and just exploring the woods were amongst the most popular of our hobbies. In 1976, at the age of 12, I had an old mini bike. This took me even farther into the woods. There was this one old dirt track we discovered that begins my story. It was an old road. The two parallel ruts forming it could only have been formed by wagon wheels and deepened by the old Model T or its contemporary rivals. I rode through this old road alone one afternoon, and as I exited the other end back into an inhabited area, an old lady called me from her front porch. I knew this old lady's name, but I will use no real names here to protect their anonymity. The lady asked me, "Did you come all the way through that holler?" "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "Boy, you don't ever go through there, ever. There's a reason they blocked that road." Now she had me curious. I had to ask, "Why, ma'am?" "Sit down, boy. I'm going to tell you a story. Whether you believe me or not, it's not my business. But if you ask around, other people can tell you," she said. This was the first time I heard about the Whisling Jack. I always thought the name sounded silly. But you have to understand, these were the same kind of people that called a species of quail a bobwhite because of its unique call, or called a yellow perch a sunfish because of its bright yellow belly. It all makes a kind of sense when you learn about these things. Her story was, this old lady I was talking to had lived in that community all her life. Her family had lived there for generations. Since shortly after Boone and Crockett had settled Tennessee, her story took place in the early 1900s before World War I. In those days, people here still rode horses and carried guns. It was still a wild area. This was long before the TVA had brought electricity to these hills. There were two families. For the sake of the story, we will call them the Smiths and the Browns. These are not the true names. The Smith family and the Brown family had small farms on opposite sides of the hollow. On Saturday, a couple of times a month, the boys of the two families would get together at one farm or another and play cards, drink some moonshine, home brew, homemade wine, and generally have some fun. One fateful Saturday, the socializing went on well past midnight. This was not something that ever happened, as they were normally the type to go to bed early and rise at dawn. Well, it was around 1 a.m. when the Brown boys climbed on their horses and started down into the hollow on the way home. The trail they followed to the bottom of the hollow crossed a small creek at the bottom of a sandbar overlooked by a large boulder. As they started to cross the creek this particular night, they heard a bird call from the top of the boulder. The innocent sound panicked the horses. All but one bolted across the creek and up the trail as fast as they could gallop. All but one, the youngest brother, was thrown from his horse as it reared and threw him in panic. The one thing that may have saved his life was the fact that his lantern fell in the sand. It didn't break or go out. Up the trail, as his brothers got their mounts under control, they heard 6 rapid shots from a .45. They forced their horses back down the creek. When they arrived at the grisly scene before them, they saw their kid brother on his knees in the sand by the lantern, trying to load his gun. Dropping some of the bullets from his shaking hands, a few feet from him was his dead horse bleeding from its throat. "I shot it," he said. "You know, I never missed this close." It took them a while to get the story out of him. When he'd been thrown from his horse, he looked up in time to see 2 large red eyes on the top of the boulder. It whistled again as it jumped for his horse. It all happened so fast, he barely had time to unload his revolver into it, and a quick succession of shots before it was on his horse, taking it to the ground. It was big. It ran, stooped over on 2 legs. It was dark, shaggy, and stank. The quick shots of the pistol were not enough to save the horse, but he knew he had hit it as it gave a hissing growl and ran off into the woods. They had heard enough. Scared and wary, they loaded him onto one of the boys' horse and rode home as fast as they could. The next morning, just after dawn, all the boys and their father took their guns and went back down the trail to the creek with the intention of hunting this thing down and recovering the youngest son's saddle and gear. They were all experienced hunters and trackers. Despite this, when they got to the creek crossing, the horse was gone. All the gear, saddle, bridle, rifle pouch were all gone as well. The sand had been brushed clean, like it had been swept with a pine branch. Even the blood was partially covered. No tracks could be found and no trace of the horse or its gear except the blood mixed in the sand. As she finished the story, I was polite enough to say I did not believe her, but she must have seen the skepticism on my face. She said, "Yeah, I never believed the story either till about 30 years ago." I looked at her questioningly, and she continued, "I used to walk down the side of the holler to gather kindling for my stove. There was always so much kindling there. Nobody else would go down there, so nobody picked it up. As time went on, I cleared all the fallen limbs from near here and would have to go deeper down into the holler to get kindling. One morning, I found a huge pile of limbs just below the rocks, close to the bottom, a little ways from the creek. I set my basket down and started breaking up sticks from a pile and filling my basket when I heard some kind of rustle under the pile. I thought it was a rabbit or a fox under there. I took my axe and pulled the brush up a little so I could see under it. There was a big hole under there, and I saw 2 big red eyes looking up at me. I dropped the axe and left it and the basket and ran all the way home. I ain't stepped foot in that holler since then. My axe and basket are still likely there if that thing didn't get 'em. I'm begging you, don't go down there no more, boy." Something about the way she gripped my arm when she said this, the look on her face made me believe her. I told her I would not go back down there. I meant it. I rode the long way around the highway to get home. 13 years later, I was 25. After 4 years in the military and a brief failed marriage, I was back on the mountain for a while. Depression soon had me roaming the woods again. When I wasn't working, the woods brought me peace. There was one spot in particular, just under a couple of 100 yards from the top of the line of a sandstone cliffs along the bluff, the western side of the mountain. There was an old-growth pine grove. I don't know if you've ever been in an old-growth pine grove in the forest. The massive pine trees seem to radiate a peaceful, quiet feeling. The thick canopy they provide inhibits undergrowth, so instead of crunchy, dead leaves, you'll have a carpet of fallen pine needles that cushion and silence your steps. It's common to find lush beds of moss in these places also. This place was several miles from that hollow I told you about before. On the other side of the plateau, foolishly, I'd spent the afternoon, evening, and well into the night hiking along the bottom of the cliffs. I had a small backpack, a little food, a couple of drinks, among other things, and a couple of flashlights in case I've found a cave I wanted to look into. I also carried my old Winchester Model 97 12 gauge, a good solid shotgun. It would hold 5 rounds in the magazine and 1 more in the chamber if you were that careless. I only kept the 5 in the mag loaded myself, an impressive shotgun by any standards. I should have known better than to be out there after dark. There are a lot of factors involved that got me there and at that moment. Sometime around midnight, I'd been sitting in a nice spot where I could see lights from the valley miles away, having a few sips of bourbon, thinking about things, just enjoying the peace and quiet. As I packed up my stuff to go home, I heard a bobwhite call a couple of 100 yards below me along a heavily wooded slope. It seemed perfectly normal for about 2 or 3 seconds. Then I froze in mid-movement. If it had been a whippoorwill or any of the normal night birds, it would have not even fazed me, but I knew that a bobwhite was a quail. Quail are not nocturnal birds. As if this wasn't puzzling enough, I heard another bobwhite answer from along the slope of the north at about my elevation. Then the first one called back from below me. It had moved closer. I've never been one to scare easily, but this was too strange. I stuffed my last things in my backpack, slung it over my shoulders, and grabbed my gun and started up towards the cliffs. There was a nice moon, so I didn't use a flashlight. I didn't want a light to give away my position. But as I eased through the brush, trying to be as quiet as possible, I got some electrical tape out of my backpack pockets and began taping one of my flashlights to the tubular magazine under the barrel of my shotgun. The calls of the strange bobwhites were still sounding from time to time, always answering each other, always getting closer, no matter how quickly and quietly I moved. Now was starting to get scared. I, who had always known my way around in the woods, always knew what the denizens of my woods would do, how they would react, was out of my experience pool here. The moment is when that story came back to me. That story that strange old lady told me 13 years ago. I began to believe I knew what was tracking me. And yes, I was being tracked. I could feel it. With this realization came a plan. By this time, the bobwhites were really close. I could now hear their steps trying to mirror mine. They were big, heavy-sounding steps. Once in a while, I'd step over and I'd hear them take a step or two before they stopped too. I would not be hunted so easily. I knew where I was, directly atop the cliff above me is where the pine grove grew, just about 500 feet from the cliff. At the bottom of this cliff, at this point, there would be a deep crevice, a crack formed from thousands of years of rain and the ice forming in the massive layers of sandstone slowly spreading it. It formed an inverted V about 4 feet wide at the bottom, in the bottom of the cliff, going back about 30 feet along the left-hand side. As you entered it, the layered stone being pulled apart over time had made a ledge that rose from the rear of the crevice to an opening at the top, just big enough for someone my size to squeeze through. Once through, you would be in a ledge about 30 feet or so up the cliff face. The overhanging layer of rock left just enough room for me to crawl along the ledge on your belly for about 40 to 50 feet. Then it opened up into a rock slide. Then you can climb to the top. The entire cliff was between 80 to 100 feet from bottom to top at this spot. I got there as quickly and quietly as I could manage. This took me maybe only 1 or 2 minutes, but under the circumstances, it seemed like time stretched on forever. Then I was in the crevice. I was soon on a ledge at the top of the crevice. I had to push my backpack and gun in front of me to get through the tight space. I was not taking time for stealth now. I was crawling and dragging and pushing my things to get to the rock slide, almost free. As I got to the slide and began to climb, I reslung my backpack and strapped my gun over my shoulder and went up on all fours. I could hear something shuffling around the bottom of the cliff outside the crevice. I didn't know why they did not go in, but I did not ponder it. I climbed. At the top, I ran to the grove, all the way to the middle of it. I leaned against one of the massive old pines in the middle of the grove and dropped my backpack, sat my gun down, and took a bottle from my bag. I needed a drink, not a soft drink either. I took a swig of bourbon as I realized my hands were shaking and I was dribbling it everywhere. Then I heard the footsteps and a bobwhite. I have no idea to this day how they got to the top of the cliff that quickly. The cliff stretched for over half a mile and stood about 1.5 miles to the north. It was a sheer cliff face in both directions. That tight crawl through the crevice was the only way up here, but there they came. I could now hear their steps clearly, long steps, longer than a man's gait. They were coming. I dropped the bottle and grabbed my gun, switching on the light. As I raised it, I pumped around into the chamber and took another from my pocket and slid it in the magazine and to replace it. They came closer and closer. Then they stopped at the edge of the grove, just deep enough in the brush to hide from my light. They were quiet, but I kept my light trained on the spot where I had heard the last sound. Why did they stop? They had run me down. Why did they not come? I couldn't see, the light beam shaking slightly. Fear had filled my blood with adrenaline. My heart was thundering in my ears. Then they moved. I could hear the long steps moving, one going each way. They were circling me. Panicked, I swung my gun barrel with the light taped to it back and forth from one to the other, waiting for a shot. I had the shotgun loaded with 00 buckshot, but I did not think it would stop them. It was just all I had. They circled around the way to the other side of the grove, away from the cliff, and met up again. It was as if they were looking for a place where they could come at me unseen. My gun was pointing at the spot where I thought they were. I had had enough. I fired, pumped the gun, and fired again. Then I heard a scream. Excuse me, but I almost peed myself just then. I do not know if I can describe to you adequately. It was not a scream of pain so much as an angry, hateful sound. It was a scream like a chimp makes on TV, except deeper and throatier. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. Then I heard them crashing through the brush, away from me across the plateau, deeper into the woods. They just left. After some length of time, I had no idea how long. It'd been silent for a while. I could sense that they were gone. It occurred to me to check my watch. I did not do this at first because it would mean lowering my gun, but eventually I had to know how long it would be until dawn. When I looked at my watch, it was 3:18 a.m., roughly 2.5 hours till daylight. I stayed there and waited as soon as it was light enough that I could see well enough not to be ambushed. I left there and ran home. I never went back to that place in the woods. In 28 years, I have not set foot in the woods there. I hike in the woods, camp, fish, but I've not hunted since then, and I never have gone back into the woods in that place. As a matter of fact, about 2 months after that night, I moved way down in Alabama to a small industrial town and took a job. I stayed there for about 25 years until early 2015. In late 2014, a relative passed away and left us a place in the Sasquatch Valley near the mountain where I grew up. I can see the cliffs just a few miles from my front porch. I would never go there. I do not think that is quite the end of this story. The house I live in sits on the edge of a 32-acre wooded property in the middle of a small community at the foot of that mountain. It seems a lot of animals use this 32 acres as a way to stop between the mountain forest and the woods along the Sasquatch River that runs down the middle of the valley. When we moved in, my daughter was already living there. She had a big old dog named Buddy. Buddy was a big, tough dog. He had been known to take on a coyote more than once here to protect his turf. A week or so after I moved in, I'd become one of Buddy's friends. He no longer barked or growled at me when I came home. He'd gotten to know me. Here's where it gets strange. Sometimes at night, he would really get excited, barking and howling enough to get me outside with my rifle. After the first time, I mounted a bright LED light on my rifle. I never saw anything except Buddy when I would go out there. He would bark, looking at the woods every so often, glancing over his shoulder at me like checking to see if I was still there. Then back at the woods, barking. I never saw anything and would end up bringing him in and letting him sleep on the rug so I can get some sleep. This went on for about 3 weeks until one night when he started his warning barking routine. This went on for 3 weeks, and I just said that. I'm so sorry. I went out and heard it. My light would not penetrate far enough into the thick brush to see it, but I heard it. Long, heavy steps going back into the woods away from us. I swear my blood ran cold. I've not heard those footsteps again since that night. Buddy still had restless nights from time to time for the next couple of years, but I never again heard the footsteps in the brush. All of the research I've done into local folk tales and accounts of this thing leads me to believe that it's either some type of Sasquatch or skunk ape. The accounts always describe a very large, foul-smelling, bipedal, powerful, apish creature. The only detail that differs from accounts of an aggressive Sasquatch encounter is the signature whistling call. Sadly, Buddy passed away this fall. It was nothing unnatural. He just succumbed to old age. We have a new dog for 2 weeks at the time I'm writing this. His name is Teddy. He's not as massive as Buddy was, although he's extremely smart for a dog and obeys well. Since he's new, I let him stay inside at night and do not let him out of the small fenced-in backyard during the day unless one of us is with him. The odd thing is, sometimes at night, he'll growl and bark during the nighttime, looking at the window or door. Whenever I get my rifle and I go out there, there's still nothing there. It kind of bothers me, but maybe I'm just worrying about nothing. That's all I can tell you about this at this time. When Ted has gotten a little more acclimated to his new home, he and I are going to take my rifle and search these woods. It's only 32 acres. This is our place. We will not be stalked or intimidated in our own ground. Rest assured, though, I will not go up those cliffs. In all honesty, at this point, I cannot claim to have actually seen anything. I know what I heard and what I've experienced, but I've not seen anything yet. Well, that's the story, everyone. And it's from the internet, from Reddit. And I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for listening.
Thanks, DeeDee. You did a great job. Having edited your other audios, I can say that was probably the best job you've done so far. Great job, honey.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Now we are going to move on to discuss a story. I guess it's a recent story. Let me look. What's the date on this? January 29th. Evidently, a 3-year-old boy goes missing. And, well, let me read it. Casey Lynn Hathaway was playing with 2 other relatives in his great-grandmother's backyard Tuesday, but they didn't come inside when the others did. His family searched for him for 45 minutes before calling 911. Craven County Sheriff Chip Hughes said, "He was walking in the woods back there and we can't find him. his grandmother told the 911 dispatcher. The other ones came through the house, but left him there, and he walked off somewhere, and we can't find him. Search and rescue teams from across the state immediately came together to brave the treacherous terrain and low temperatures, hoping to find Casey. The FBI, NCIS, dozens of volunteers, and U.S. Marine Corps also joined the effort to find the boy, Hughes said. Authorities employed helicopters, drones, and canine units. Craven County Emergency Management Director Stanley Kite said. Drivers also assessed nearby ponds. WTVD reported, I guess that's a TV station. Casey, who authorities said weighed 25 pounds and is 2 feet 4 inches tall, was stuck out in conditions so bad that volunteers were turned away from the search. Hughes said his team was concerned about the extreme cold as temperatures dipped near freezing, but against all odds, they found him. It was folks giving us tips and leads, Hughes said. We hit every one of them immediately, and it paid off. On day 3, a tip led the search team to a spot where they were able to hear the 3-year-old calling out for his mother, Hughes said. He was found 40 to 50 yards away. And I'm kind of reading this out of order because I wanted to read the story part before I read this other part. He was found on Thursday, cold but alive, in a mess of vines and thorns in Craven County, North Carolina. But the 3-year-old has volunteered one noteworthy detail about those days in the woods. A bear kept him company. He made a comment about having a friend while he was in the woods. His friend was a bear. Major David McFadden with the Craven County Sheriff's Office told CNN Monday. In the emergency room, he started talking about what happened in the woods, and he said he had a friend that was a bear with him while he was in the woods. McFadden said that there are bears in the woods of Craven County, but there's no evidence to prove one was with Casey. All that matters, McFadden said, is that something was there to comfort him during the 3 days. We were very pleased he had that type of comfort. There were very brutal conditions out there. The first night, it dropped down to 20 degrees. The second night, we had 2 inches of rain, he said. The 3-year-old boy will undergo a forensic psychological exam this week, McFadden said. But for now, authorities are giving Casey time to recover and settle in with his family. He has not been interviewed yet about what happened. He's a 3-year-old little boy, McFadden said. Until we do a forensic exam, we won't have a definite idea. So, that was pretty interesting. 3-year-old boy, missing 3 days, 20-degree weather, 2 inches of rain, and he lives because a bear was helping him. I don't know about you folks, but I think if a bear had a hold of a 2-foot and something 3-year-old boy, he wouldn't be keeping him warm. He'd probably be warming his belly with him, you know. Sounds to me, and I think by the way that they write the interview or write the article, everybody involved is thinking Bigfoot, Sasquatch, that a Sasquatch was helping the little kid. So, anyway, guys in the panel, wait a minute, I'm going to read some comments here real quick. Yeah, Sam Squatch, no, man, it was a bear. The little boy said it was a bear. Although I kind of think he probably hasn't seen the Patterson-Gimlin film yet. He's only 3. Mammal in the Woods. Oh, well, thank you, Mammal in the Woods. He says, thanks, Rick and DeeDee. In case y'all ain't figured it out, DeeDee's sitting right here. Beta Tech says, thank you, DeeDee. You going to jump in on the chat?
For the story?
On the chat?
Oh, on the chat.
Yeah, you want to do chat? All right, folks. DeeDee's going to jump in chat and say hello to y'all. Yay! DeeDee, thank you. I saw someone say something about awesome or something. Yeah, thanks. That was awesome. 100%. And hold on. Somebody hit. Can't remember who it was. Time All right, folks, we're going to go on over to panel. What do you guys in panel think of that? First of all, DeeDee story. DeeDee did a great job, I thought, reading it live.
Yeah, she definitely did.
Anybody else there? Dark Chris, Don, Lane, Ralph, and Al.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Great job.
And what about the 3-year-old kid? What do you think? Bear or Bigfoot?
I'm wondering if it could have been a female Sasquatch.
Yeah, it's definitely not a bear, that's for sure.
Hey,
No, bear.
To put in about that bear, about the 3-year-old kid. This time of year, bear are hibernating. There is no way that bear is out and it's going to take care of a little kid that's 3 years old.
Well, that's
it
true.
It had to be a female Sasquatch, either a juvenile or a full-grown female.
That's true. Bears are hibernating in January, coldest month of the year, pretty much everywhere in the United States. What was it, North Carolina? Was that what it was? Huh?
Yeah, North Carolina.
Yeah, I think the bears are hibernating in North Carolina in January.
I was bear hunting in North Carolina, and they do hibernate from usually about Christmas until about the 1st of March.
Well, some of them are, you know, occasionally they'll catch bears on trail cams and stuff that are supposed to be hibernating, but that wasn't a bear with that little kid. The bear would have ate him, I guarantee it. That wasn't no bear that was taking care of him.
Yeah, a bear, middle of winter, nice little morsel wanders up. he'd ate him for sure. Actually, I'm a little surprised the Sasquatch didn't eat him, but that just goes to show that there's a very broad gap of attitudes with Sasquatch. Everything from eating the kid to helping the kid, you know, right?
Yeah, I heard a story a while back. Well, I've heard it a few times, but it's been around for quite a while, of a kid that got lost and was crying and everything, and was picked up by a female Sasquatch supposedly, and actually taken back within about 100 yards of his camp and dropped off. And he made his way back to camp because his parents were hollering and everything, and they said he told them what happened and everything, and they made him go to his tent, and there was some, I don't know if it was his uncle or something, he was saying, well, he knew what it was or something like that. And so, I mean, there's a few stories like that around.
I've heard the same story.
Hey, go ahead, Al.
I've actually heard the same story.
Yeah, I guess there's quite a few stories out there about Bigfoot's helping or Sasquatch helping kids get back to the camp, back to the parents, that kind of thing. And they're even elusive about that. You know, they'll get the kid just close enough that they know that they'll be found. They don't just like walk them up into camp and say, here you go, here's your kid. You know.
Yeah, that's true. And there's also a lot of stories about them eating them too. So, you know, like you say, there's a wide range. It varies from one end of the scale to the other.
Yeah, everything from eating to helping. That's well, it's people are the same way. You go into one town and everyone will help you, and the other town they'll just as soon shoot you as look at you. So that just to me bodes well for the theory that they're very human-like in their sensibilities, their personalities, and that kind of thing.
I would dare to say that most of the time, whenever there's a kid, you know, a young child that's in the woods and gets lost, I would say 9 times out of 10, it's probably a female that helps them get back close to their camp.
Yeah, assuming that Sasquatch have the same kind of sensibility as humans. You know, the females are nesters and the males are hunter-gatherers and that kind of thing. The males want to kill and eat it. The females want to help it. Yeah, if you showed the kid the photos, I think he would pick out a Bigfoot too.
Yeah, the family probably been told to shut up.
Wait a minute. Hold on. You know who I'm not seeing here? Where's Amy? She must have hurt her back again. She's usually right in here.
I can't figure out why they want to do a psych evaluation on this kid. That don't make a whole lot of sense. 3-year-old? Wow.
Are you serious? I didn't hear that. Wow.
Yeah, they're doing a forensic psych evaluation of the kid. And
oh my God.
That kind of sounds like they really want to get to the truth of the matter, or they want to try and convolute the truth. I don't know which one, but the kid's saying it's a bear, so they could just stick with that story. It almost sounds like they want to find out if it was a Sasquatch.
Almost like a debriefing, you know?
Yeah. So anyway, folks, we've been going for 36 minutes. Anyone else have any comments, questions?
It's her birthday.
It's what?
Amy's birthday.
Oh, that's right. Amy's birthday today. She's probably out celebrating. All right, folks, we're going to close out this show a little differently. As you can see, DeeDee is here in person. And just for y'all, we're going to, we thought we'd do this special, and that is, DeeDee, would you please be my wife?
Yes.
So now, DeeDee has agreed to become Mrs. Jones.
Thank you.
And if y'all can, we would love it if you could. We're trying to get a place to live, and we've created a FundMe so that we could get the first last security and that kind of thing. Don't feel no pressure. Just, you know, anything would be appreciated. And I just put the link in the chat to hit our GoFundMe. So that's pretty much the show. And until next time, if I can find my end screen there, y'all take it easy.
Congratulations, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, congrats, guys.
Thanks.